The smoke has fouled the air over 100 million people and crossed an entire ocean to Europe. And the hardest part to accept is that this is a below-average season, with the country's forecasters warning the worst stretch has not yet arrived. Here's what's driving it and what happens next. Canada is on fire in more than 800 places at once. As of yesterday, roughly 857 active wildfires were burning across the country, and more than 700 of them were classified as out of control. That phrase is not a figure of speech. It is a formal designation, and it means exactly what it sounds like. These fires are not being contained, not being steered, not being held at a line. They are doing what they want, across thousands of kilometers of northern forest. And about 60 of them are large enough or dangerous enough to have full crews thrown directly at them. On a single day during this mid-July stretch, 21 new fires ignited. That is nearly one new fire an hour on top of the hundreds already burning. The season total tells you how fast this built. Since the start of the year, there have been about 3,137 fires, and they have burned through roughly 1.4 million hectares, about 3.5 million acres of land. Those are the kinds of numbers that would define a bad year almost anywhere else on Earth. And here's the part that should get your attention, because it is the thing that changes this from a news story into a warning. By the standard that scientists actually use to rank fire seasons, this one is not even a record. It is below average. The word uncontrolled deserves one more beat because it is easy to read past. Firefighting agencies do not get to fight every fire. When hundreds of them are burning at once across terrain with no roads, no water source, and no way to land equipment, crews are forced into triage. They defend the fires that threaten towns and lives, and they let the ones burning in empty backcountry run, because there is physically no way to reach them. So, out of control does not always mean the situation is being ignored. Often, it means the fire is somewhere a human being simply cannot get to with a hose and a bulldozer, and the only thing that will stop it is a change in the weather. When more than 700 fires carry that label at the same time, it tells you the system has been overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The comparison is worth sitting with for a moment. At this exact point last year, in 2025, Canada had recorded fewer fires, 2,913, but those fires had already burned about 4.6 million hectares. That is more than 3 times the area that has burned so far in 2026. So this year has more ignitions and far less scorched ground, which puts the 2026 season below the 5-year average for area burned. On paper, this is a quieter year. That is the whole problem in a single sentence. If this is what a below-average season looks like, 2 provinces shut down, the military deployed, civilians dead, and a smoke plume crossing an ocean, then the ceiling has not been tested. Environment and Climate Change Canada is forecasting above-average temperatures across much of the country from now into August, with dry conditions continuing in places like Manitoba and northwestern Ontario. British Columbia, Alberta, and the Northwest Territories are flagged for the highest ongoing risk. Federal officials have been blunt about the framing. This season started slowly, but it started at high risk. Translation: what you're watching right now may be the opening act, not the finale. To understand what a real blow-up year looks like, you only have to look back a couple of summers. In 2023, Canada had its worst fire season in recorded history, more than double the previous record for area burned. And it was the season that turned the sky over New York City an apocalyptic orange for days, one of the most photographed air quality events in modern American memory. Then 2025 delivered another extraordinary year. 2 record-scale seasons inside 3 years is the pattern sitting behind the current one, and it is the reason forecasters are not treating a below-average July as reassuring. It is the low end of a range that now has a very high top. The concern is not that 2026 already matches 2023. It clearly does not. At least not yet. The concern is how quickly a below-average season can flip once the heat and dryness arrive on the schedule the forecasters are describing. 2 provinces have already given up the pretense that this is manageable. Manitoba declared a province-wide state of emergency, with officials describing the wildfire activity as unprecedented, and the majority of the province sitting under extreme fire danger. Saskatchewan followed with its own state of emergency, and both crews and military forces were pushed forward to fight dozens of out-of-control fires. A state of emergency is not a symbolic gesture. It unlocks powers a government does not use lightly, the authority to order evacuations, to commandeer resources, to move people against their will because the alternative is worse. The reason those powers matter is that the fires have started to cost lives, not just property. 4 people have died during firefighting operations this season, and in the small town of Lac du Bonnet, Manitoba, 2 civilians were killed. reported as the first civilian wildfire deaths in the province's recent history. Think about what that means. Manitoba is a place where wildfire has historically meant a hard summer, a forced evacuation, maybe a lost cabin or a lost home. It has not meant residents dying. That line has now been crossed, and once a threshold like that falls, it reframes everything about how dangerous the season really is. The presence of the military tells you something too. Armed forces are not wildfire specialists. The government does not call them in for a normal season. They get deployed when the civilian firefighting system runs out of capacity. When there are more fires than there are crews, more evacuations than there are buses, more remote communities cut off than local resources can reach. In this case, soldiers were helping move people out of communities that had no other way to leave. When you see the Army assisting in evacuation, that is the clearest possible sign that the ordinary machinery for handling a fire season has been stretched past its limit, and the country has reached for its backup. The evacuation numbers show how many people this fire season has already displaced. More than 33,000 people have been forced from their homes across the country. In Manitoba alone, roughly 17,000 were under evacuation orders, with people sheltering in Winnipeg, and some bussed as far as hotels in Niagara Falls, Ontario, hundreds of kilometers from home, waiting to find out whether they still have one. Indigenous communities have been hit hardest of all. As of the middle of this week, 9 First Nations had been affected by wildfire, 6 of them had been evacuated, and roughly 1,500 individuals had been displaced. The Canadian Armed Forces were assisting the evacuation of 2 of those communities in Manitoba. Those frontline stories keep repeating across the map. Earlier in the season, West Kelowna in British Columbia ordered a fast tactical evacuation of about 800 people and hundreds of properties as a fire moved on the community. Across the country in Nova Scotia, the Long Lake Fire in the Annapolis Valley burned roughly 8,500 hectares and destroyed about 20 homes. These are the specific human ground truths sitting underneath the national statistics, and yet, for the overwhelming majority of people who are about to be affected by these fires, none of this is what they will actually experience. Because the largest consequence of these fires is not the flame, it is the smoke. Most people touched by these fires will never see one. That is the strange, defining feature of this entire event, and it is why this is international news instead of a regional emergency. Massive plumes of smoke have poured south across the border, degrading air quality for more than 100 million people across the United States, the Midwest, the Great Lakes, the Northeast, and the Mid-Atlantic. Around New York, visibility dropped to somewhere between 2 and 5 miles. The skylines of New York City and Boston turned hazy and yellow-gray. Michigan issued a statewide air quality alert. Minnesota, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and New England followed. The scale of the government response gives you a sense of how widespread the exposure was. On a single day this week, the United States had 181 air quality alerts and 18 dense smoke advisories active at the same time. And the smoke was forecast to get worse, not better, across the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic through the end of the week. So a person in Philadelphia or New York or Detroit steps outside, smells something metallic, notices the sun looks wrong, checks a warning on their phone, and every bit of that is the downstream signature of a fire burning 1,000 miles away in a forest they will never stand in. The smoke is the messenger, and it travels much farther than the fire ever could. This is also the point where the internet fills up with a different explanation, and it is worth addressing head-on before moving past it. Every large fire season now brings a wave of viral claims that the fires were set deliberately. A coordinated arson campaign, or in the stranger versions, fires started by some kind of directed energy weapon from the sky. The honest response is to separate the grain of truth from the fantasy. Yes, individual fires do sometimes have human causes, and arson is real, but a continent-scale season of hundreds of simultaneous ignitions, spread across thousands of kilometers of roadless northern forest, is not something a person with a lighter produces. The energy that lights and spreads these fires comes from lightning, bone-dry fuel, and wind, the ordinary physics of a hot, parched terrain. There is no evidence of exotic ignition, and none is needed to explain what the drought and the heat are already doing. The frightening part of this story is not a hidden hand. It is how normal the ingredients are. One number from this event stands out above all the others. Earlier this week, Toronto, a city of roughly 3 million people in one of the wealthiest countries on the planet, recorded the worst air quality of any major city on Earth. Not one of the worst, the worst. It sat at the top of the global live rankings, above the mega cities usually associated with hazardous smog, and the city issued an orange air quality alert. That is the smoke from northwestern Ontario's fires, where more than 180 wildfires were burning by midweek, with 136 of them in the northwest region alone. For a G7 city to top that list, even briefly, is an inversion of how we expect the world to work, and it tells you just how concentrated that plume became. It is the clearest possible signal that the air does not care about borders, wealth, or infrastructure. A dense enough column of wildfire smoke will foul the air over 3 million people just as easily over Toronto as over anywhere else, and then it will keep moving. There's a psychological weight to that ranking that goes beyond the raw health numbers. Cities that usually sit at the top of the world's worst air lists are places most people mentally file under a different category of problem. Decades of industrial haze, dense traffic, a particular set of circumstances that feel far away. To see a clean, modern North American city appear at the very top, for a reason that materialized in a matter of days, breaks that mental filing system. It is a reminder that this is not a slow, chronic condition building over generations. It is an acute event that can drop out of the sky onto a place that had nothing wrong with its air the week before. And because the fires driving it are hundreds of kilometers away and completely out of that city's control, there is nothing Toronto's residents could have done locally to prevent it. They simply woke up inside a plume. The plume did not stop at the American coastline. The Copernicus Atmosphere Monitoring Service, Europe's atmospheric watchdog, confirmed that large amounts of smoke from the Canadian wildfires reached Europe, carried across the entire Atlantic Ocean on the upper-level winds. This is not a freak occurrence anymore. The same transatlantic transport was documented in 2023, in 2024, and again in 2025. A fire in remote Manitoba or northwestern Ontario is now, in a real and measurable way, an air quality event on 2 continents. That is the through line of this whole story, the complete separation of cause from effect. The cause is a set of fires in some of the most remote forest on the continent, seen by almost no one. The effect is a yellowed sky over New York, a hazardous air warning in Detroit, a child reaching for an inhaler in Boston, and a haze detected by instruments in Western Europe. When people say the fires have broken free, this is what breaking free actually means. They are not racing toward one particular town. They have broken free of containment as an operational reality, and their farthest reaching product has escaped into the jet stream and gone global. Here is where it helps to slow down for a moment and understand what that haze is really made of. Because the danger is not the part you can see. The pollutant that matters most in wildfire smoke is called particulate matter 2.5, fine particles measuring 2.5 micrometers across or smaller. To picture that, one of these particles is roughly 1/30th the width of a single human hair. These particles make up around 90% of the total particle mass a wildfire throws into the air, and their size is precisely what makes them dangerous. The body has defenses against larger dust and debris. The nose, the throat, the natural filters in the upper airway that catch big particles before they get anywhere important. Particulate matter 2.5 slips right past all of it. It travels down into the smallest airways of the lungs, and from there it can cross directly into the bloodstream. That is the whole reason a barely visible haze is a physiological event, and not just a visual one. Short-term exposure can trigger asthma attacks, acute bronchitis, eye irritation, and aggravated lung disease, and it raises the risk of respiratory infection. In serious cases, for vulnerable people, it can push an overtaxed cardiovascular system or an already struggling set of lungs past the edge. The strongest evidence is for sudden worsening of asthma and COPD, and it shows up as measurable spikes in emergency room visits and hospital admissions in the days after a smoke event rolls through. It also helps to correct a common instinct about the smell. People tend to assume that if they cannot smell smoke, the air is safe, and if the smell fades, the danger is past. Neither is reliable. The particles that do the real damage are far too small to see and do not always announce themselves through odor, which is why health agencies tell people to watch the air quality index rather than trust their nose. A day when the sky is cleared to a pale, ordinary-looking haze can still carry enough fine particulate to send vulnerable people to the hospital. This is the quiet trap of a smoke event. The threat is most concentrated in exactly the part of the air you cannot detect on your own, and by the time symptoms appear, the exposure has already happened. There is one more detail in the science that changes how you should think about this. Wildfire smoke appears to be more harmful, particle for particle, than the ordinary pollution from cars and industry that people in cities breathe every day. When researchers measure it, they find that respiratory hospitalizations rise somewhere between 1.3% and as much as 10% for every 10 micrograms per cubic meter of wildfire particulate. For the same amount of pollution from typical urban sources, the increase is smaller, between roughly 0.2% and 1.3%. The wildfire version does more damage. The reason has to do with chemistry. Wildfire smoke carries compounds that generate more free radicals once they are in the lung, which drives more inflammation and more oxidative stress in the tissue than everyday city particulate does. In plain terms, your lungs react more violently to the same dose. And the people who pay for that hardest are the ones you would expect. The elderly, young children whose lungs are still developing, and anyone already living with a cardiac or respiratory condition. The timing of this particular event makes that worse because the smoke has been arriving on top of extreme heat across much of the eastern United States. Those two hazards work against each other in a way that traps people. In a heat wave, the standard advice is to open the windows at night, get some airflow, cool the house down. In a smoke event, the advice is the opposite. Seal the house, close the windows, run the air conditioning on recirculate, and keep the outside air out. When both hit at once, the vulnerable people at the center of each warning are handed two instructions that cancel each other, and many of them do not have a good option. An older resident without air conditioning, choosing between a stifling sealed apartment and an open window that lets the smoke in, is facing a genuine no-win situation. That overlap is not a rare edge case anymore. It is becoming a signature feature of North American summers, where a heat dome and a smoke plume increasingly show up in the same place at the same time, and the two threats stack instead of canceling out. Now step back and ask why the whole system is primed the way it is, because the fires are only the visible end of a longer chain. The atmosphere over North America has been set up almost perfectly to dry out fuel and move smoke. A heat dome has been parked over the central United States, and Canadian temperatures have run above average, and both of those pull moisture straight out of the forest, turning living trees and damp soil into ready fuel. On the American side, the ground is already thirsty. Nearly 66% of the contiguous United States is in abnormally dry conditions, or worse, and almost 11% is in the more severe drought categories. Underneath all of it is a shift in the Pacific. The ocean has swung into El Niño conditions. The key index sits at plus 0.98, and it moved by more than 1.5 degrees in a remarkably short span. That kind of rapid swing matters because El Niño reshapes weather patterns across the whole hemisphere, nudging where the heat pools, where the rain falls, and where it does not. When you combine a warmed baseline with an El Niño pulse on top of it, you get an atmosphere that is unusually good at drying out fuel and steering the resulting smoke over populated areas, which is more or less a description of exactly what has been happening. There is also a longer horizon worry that scientists raise carefully as a mechanism under study rather than a settled forecast. The northern boreal forest is one of the planet's largest stores of carbon, holding enormous amounts of it in trees, in soil, and in thick layers of peat that have taken thousands of years to accumulate. When it burns on a severe enough scale, it releases that carbon, and a bad enough fire year can turn the forest from something that quietly absorbs carbon into something that adds it. Over time, that added carbon feeds the very warming that dries the next season's fuel, a loop that, if it takes hold, would make each severe season a little more likely to be followed by another. No single year proves that loop is running, and researchers are careful to say so. But two extraordinary seasons in 2023 and 2025, followed by a fast escalating 2026, are exactly the kind of clustering that keeps the question open. The honest answer to how bad this gets is that we do not know yet. And that uncertainty is the story. The season is below average by area burned, but it has more than 700 fires out of control and roughly 21 new ignitions in a single day, and Canada's own forecasters are calling for hotter and drier weather straight through August. The question that will define the next several weeks is whether 2026 crosses over from a below-average year into a blow-up year, the way 2023 and 2025 did. The fuels are primed, the pattern is in place, and the ceiling has not been reached. Watch three things over the coming days. Watch whether the out-of-control fire count and the evacuation totals keep climbing, because those are the live counters that tell you if this is stabilizing or accelerating. Watch how long the current smoke episode lingers over the American Northeast, and how far the European transport actually reaches, since both have a defined near-term window before conditions shift. And watch the temperature and a drought outlook across the Canadian West, because that is where the